Sound check, Olivia. Can you hear us?
Yes, you're there now.
Okay, excellent. Okay, we'll get started. I believe I just want to confirm, Chief Morrison, you are on the line as well? Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I want to start again by speaking to the protests across the nation that have been sparked by the murder by Minneapolis police of George Floyd, including the protests here in Burlington. I also want to speak to some of the unfinished work that we have to do here in Burlington and how we are moving forward with it. Unfinished work with respect to our own policing policies and practices. I'm again, as you can see, joined by Chief Jennifer Morrison today, and we'll turn it over to her to speak in a moment. The events of the past week of the weekend, on top of what happened last week, have made it clear that we are facing one of the toughest tests the nation has ever faced. At the very moment that we are dealing with the combined threat of a terrible pandemic and the greatest economic challenge since the Great Depression, we must also reckon with the fact that our country is still defined by deep structural racism. I am thankful that on Saturday, Burlington demonstrated its rejection of the status quo, the unacceptability of the status quo, and did so peacefully. And I am thankful for how the Burlington Police Department handled the policing of the demonstrations on Saturday, and I appreciate the courage and leadership that both Chief Jennifer Morrison and Deputy Chief John Murad showed in the way they engaged with protesters that evening. On Friday, both Chief Morrison and I spoke to the situation in Minneapolis, and I said that I both welcomed the investigation of all the police officers who were involved in the arrest of the lead officer, which had just happened shortly before the briefing on Friday. I do support the continued calls by protesters in Minneapolis and across the country for further justice and further accountability, and that the other officers who were on the scene and did not intervene to stop the lead officer who was applying pressure to George Floyd's neck, that they also should be arrested and charged. And I welcome that the governor called for that explicitly this morning as well. That focus on the right, that the duty that we all have, and that police officers in this situation have a special duty not to just be bystanders, that they have a duty to intervene, is something that, and the focus on that has, over the last week, has really made it clear to me that among the unfinished work that we need to move on urgently is that the special committee on policing that we set up last year noted that the duty to intervene is not explicitly and clearly part of our current use of force policy, or at least it was not before today. Chief Morrison and I have been discussing this situation, and because the process by which the reforms laid out in the special policing committee have been delayed by the pandemic, today Chief Morrison took action on that matter specifically. I want to turn this over now to Chief Morrison to describe the order she gave earlier today.
Sure. Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I want to back up to last week before you and I made our public statements. On Thursday, we sent a training clip with visual aids to all of our sworn personnel, specifically in light of what we saw on the videos coming out of Minneapolis. And I just want to make clear that we were, as quickly as we could, we put together a training brief that is the best we can do short of being hands-on with each other, rolling around on mats, and reinforced what our policy allows, what it doesn't allow, and the types of restraints that are allowed. So as early as last Thursday, we were taking aggressive action to make sure that we were reconfirming what folks have already been trained to and the standard to which they're trained. You and I made our public statements on Friday. I followed that up earlier today with a memorandum that serves 4 purposes. One is to issue 2 orders that will remain in place until the updated use of force policy is issued. Candidly, we're ready to roll with an updated use of force policy that incorporates most of the recommendations of the special committee. I want to be cautious to not step on process. I know there are processes in place, but I'm feeling a sense of urgency, like I want that updated policy to go into effect. So we can talk about that, and I can talk about it with the police commission in another venue. But this order that I issued today, this memorandum, contains 2 orders, and it contains 3 reminders of existing policy. Order number 1 is that all personnel are required to intervene anytime they witness misconduct, excessive use of force, or any other violation of a department rule or policy. The second order is in any use of force scenario, de-escalation should always be prioritized whenever it is safe and feasible to do so. Further, officers must be aware that their own behavior can escalate the level of force needed to respond to a situation, and take care to not unnecessarily escalate situations. These 3 things contained in the 2 orders are all part of that drafted the new use of force policy. So in order to put that in place, I issued it as an order. And those orders will remain in effect until we adopt the new use of force policy. The memo that I cut today also provided reminder of 3 things that already exist in our policy manual, in our written directives. One is a rule, and it's important to note that rules are inviolate. Those are they apply to all, and they cannot be violated, whereas a policy generally has some wiggle room depending on the circumstances. And rule number 8 has been in existence for years and years, and it says that officers shall use force in accordance with the law and department procedures, and shall not use more force than is reasonably necessary under the circumstances. The second existing department directive that this memo calls attention to is merely a reminder to our personnel that we have Department Directive number 43 that talks about corruption and misconduct and how officers are to handle reports of misconduct or corruption, which would include excessive use of force. And the third reminder contained in this memo is to remind sworn personnel of their duty to care for persons in their custody, which is already in our existing use of force policy, and it has been for as long as I can remember. And specific to that, an excerpt from our current use of force policy under the section on post-event procedures states explicitly that whenever an officer responds to resistance or uses force, and a suspect sustains an injury, becomes unconscious, displays a further altered mental status, or states that they are injured, officers should render aid commensurate with their training and experience and summon emergency medical assistance as quickly as possible. So that's been in the policy a long time, but this memo served to issue the 2 orders and provide those reminders. And I think that's an important way just to reassure the community that we're not just making the assumption that this will never happen in Burlington. I don't believe it will ever happen in Burlington. Our training is very good. Our selection process is very good. Our supervision and review of uses of force is very good. But I think that right now the community needs to know that we are doing everything possible to prevent anything like what we saw in Minneapolis from happening here.
Well said, Chief, and I appreciate the quick work to do everything we can to ensure that. I share your confidence in the men and women of the department and in the systems that you just described that are designed to ensure that something like what happened with George Floyd does not happen here. But it's incumbent on us to do everything we can to ensure that. And I do think having an explicit policy on this duty to intervene is an important step that you've taken today. So I appreciate that you and your unique role under our charter, or explicit role under our charter, as the one and setting policy and setting direction, have taken that step today. I do want to speak just briefly to the kind of larger efforts. We did have. I just want to be clear about where this larger effort that came out of the the incidents involving Burlington police officers and in 2018 and 2019, and resulted in a special committee being set up. It was a step that I fully supported, and the council supported by, I believe, unanimous resolution. This special policing committee met numerous times over the course of last summer and fall and into the winter. And I just want to remind people where we are in that process, because I think it's an important, as we're having a discussion about where does our work with respect to policing and race, and more just generally good 21st century policing, where does that work stand? Here's where it stands. The committee finished its work on February 12th with a report. That report was presented to the city council and accepted by the council on February 18th. And at that point, it was forwarded to the Public Safety Committee of the city council for the next step, essentially. And that the intent at the time was for the Public Safety Committee to kind of lay out next steps. Unfortunately, from that February 18th council vote until March 23rd, the coronavirus pandemic hit Burlington, and we were entered into the emergency that we are still in, and the committee work did not move forward. President Tracy and I have spoken about this situation several times over recent weeks, including before the George Floyd situation, about the urgency for that work to continue forward. We have certainly talked about it with even greater urgency in the last week. And I know he is thinking very seriously about how that work be conducted from here with a proper role for both the council and the police commission, this oversight body that is made up of citizens of Burlington, and that we have taken steps to strengthen and really ensure has a strong role in the civilian oversight and engagement of the work of the police department. And we will have more to say on that shortly. I spoke to President Tracy as recently as today on that process, and I know he shares my eagerness to see that work go forward, so that we can continue to make progress on these issues with these other bodies, the Police Commission and the City Council. Thank you, Chief Morrison, and we're going to now move on to other updates for the day here. We now have some broader updates on the city's effort to respond to the pandemic. Olivia is bringing up the slide deck for today, and we're going to start with an update on our green stimulus plan. Close followers of these briefings, people who have been following this issue will remember that back in April, really quite early on in this pandemic, we announced that we announced this green stimulus plan, and the fact that most of it, not all of it, but that most of it needed additional regulatory approval for them. So we took 15 new programs to the Public Utilities Commission. That's the right title now, right, Darren? I'm joined by Darren Springer, the General Manager of the Burlington Electric Department. We appreciate that the PUC, as it's called, moved very quickly to review those programs. And we did just hear back last week that they have fully approved the requests, and all 15 of these programs are now live. You can find details about them on the Burlington Electric Department website, and we can give you a quick summary of these and highlights right now from Darren Springer. Darren, welcome back to the briefing.
Thanks, Mayor. Good afternoon. We are taking very seriously your words from the state of the city that even as we grapple with this pandemic, we'll continue to make progress on addressing our net zero energy plan and addressing the climate emergency here in Burlington. And so the green stimulus is very much aimed at accomplishing as much progress as we can on net zero energy, and doing so in a way that really helps all of our customers, our renters and homeowners, our low and moderate income customers, our small businesses and nonprofits that need additional help as they make energy efficiency improvements. So programs that are live now, with our thanks to the Department of Public Service and PUC for their thorough but expeditious review. As you can see on the screen, heat pump and weatherization incentives. You now can receive up to $3,500 for full climate heat pump installations. That's up from a maximum previously of $2,200. Electric and plug-in hybrid vehicle incentives have been increased up to $1,800, with additional incentives available for our low and moderate income customers. Those can be combined with state and federal incentives to make driving electric even more affordable. We have a whole host of new appliance rebates that are available through our Cash for Appliances program. We also have financing at 0% for small businesses and nonprofits who want to make energy efficiency upgrades. We have a host of incentives for those customers as well. If they have a failing heating and cooling system, if they're looking to install heat pumps or geothermal systems, we have a variety of incentives there as well. So we're excited to go live with these programs today. Now, the rebate forms are up on the website, and those programs will last for the duration of 2020 or until funding is fully utilized. And as a reminder for all the viewers, we did receive approval to carry forward about $800,000, a little over $800,000 in energy efficiency funds to support this program. So you've got the website link at the bottom of this slide. And I would also encourage anybody who has questions to contact our team at 865-7300, or by sending an email to efficiency@burlingtonelectric.com. And we're glad to help if folks have questions about the new programs.
Great, Darren. Thank you for your work and your team's work on this. I really think you've, with this regulatory approval, this is a major step in ensuring that we're serious about this idea that we, while engaging this hot, immediate crisis of the pandemic and the related economic crisis, that we have another emergency. We have a declared climate emergency that we can't ignore, and that we need, wherever possible, to make progress on them both. This is a way to do that. Now it is in the hands of Burlingtonians whether you want to, whether this is something that you're wanting to and able to move on. And so again, anyone who wants details on these 15 new programs, which really span the full range of electric interventions that can have an impact on the carbon emissions of a household or business, that you go check out the website and think about whether one of these investments makes sense for you or your organization right now. So thank you again for the work, Darren. We'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you, Mayor.
We did want to give, it's June 1. We've talked quite a bit over the last couple of weeks about this June 1 plan that we have been formulating with the state, UVM, and Champlain College. It is essentially a kind of focused example of this box it in strategy that we have been talking about a lot as we have been moving into this reopening stage. We are trying to box in the virus with these 4 strategies: testing, isolation, finding or contact tracing, and quarantine. supported quarantine is a new concept here in Burlington and across the country, and the city is trying to kind of step into this strategy and find ways to support people who are doing the tough work of complying with the governor's order, which requires people, when they come across state lines, coming from places where there are much higher levels of virus transmission than we've seen since mid-April here in Chittenden County. The city wants to be as supportive as we can to people doing that work and to students who maybe don't have a strong local network of family and relationships to rely on. So we have been with UVM communicating with the students that we believe are coming back to this community on June 1. So far, 41 students have signed up for the supportive quarantine pilot program. We do want to see that number go higher, and we're trying to communicate and push and encourage, promote this supportive program in every way we can in the coming days. If you know someone who is here in Burlington, and it doesn't have to be a student, but it is someone who is in quarantine because they are trying to comply with the governor's order, or because they have had a close contact who has been tested positive, the city is happy to do everything we can to support that quarantine. So you can go to the city's website and sign right up there, and you will immediately be contacted by the team that is working to provide these supportive quarantine services. Final item we wanted to touch on today is the fiscal year 2021 budget process. We just want to give people an update on this, and why is this in the COVID-19 briefing? Well, the budget this year has been very much impacted by the pandemic and the economic fallout. We are anticipating a dramatic reduction in revenues right now in FY21. The new fiscal year begins on July 1st. And we have been working with the council for several weeks now to try to really essentially rewrite the budget and find a way to move forward, continue city services, not put more city workers on into the huge number of unemployment rolls, and present a balanced budget. And we have had, I would say since the last briefing, which was about a week and a half ago, the budget work has moved in a positive direction. We are seeing revenues come in slightly higher in the final quarter of this fiscal year 20, than we had previously been modeling, and we have made adjustments in FY21 as a result, and that helps. We have had some other modest changes. We found some ways to define expenses, and right now the budget gap, which began as a budget gap of $10 million when we started this budget process, between the revenues that we believed were we can no longer bank on, and increased expenses. Actually, I think in some ways the budget challenge in March with the outside of the pandemic was as much as $12 million. It's down to less than $1 million. We'll be talking about that at the briefing tonight with the council. All of this is moving towards a submission of the mayor's budget to the city council by in advance of June 15th, as required by the charter. So this is something to be focused on, that we'll be focused on over the next couple of weeks. And we will have more to say about this in the special session at 6 o'clock tonight. I think that is the update that we have for this afternoon, and be happy to answer some questions if there are any from the media. We have WCAX here in the studio. Aaron, did you have any questions?
I do. My first question we already touched on reaction to Saturday's protest, but we also wanted to know, are you concerned about a potential second wave of coronavirus cases, since such a large crowd was at that protest? I think 1,200 people. Does that concern you at all?
It does concern me. We know that in past pandemics, big events like parades and other mass gatherings have led to, they can be super spreader type events. I appreciate that, many of the protesters came wearing face coverings. I think that is important. I know that many of the demonstrators really worked to try to keep social distance, especially early on in the evening. At a certain point, that no longer was possible given the sizes of the crowds. And I certainly respect and frankly appreciate that so many people came out to again make it clear that Burlington is in no way. Burlington knows that this country needs to continue to change, and that Burlington needs to continue to change, and that we have deep structural racism in this country and in this community that has not been adequately addressed. And I am glad Burlingtonians came out in large numbers to make that clear. I do have concern. I do think we are at an incredible moment here where we have these multiple crises going on at the same time, and people will need, if they're as we go forward, I certainly do have concerns about continued mass gatherings. I'm hopeful that given what we have seen in the data, what we've seen in the numbers, is that they're things were in such good shape leading into at this point in Vermont. There is so little virus transmission going on. Hopefully, that combined with the fact that many protesters were taking precautions will mean that we will not see that kind of spike. But I think it's certainly something to be concerned about and for people to be mindful about going forward from here.
And do you have any advice for protesters? Like, should they self-quarantine or should they take any extra precautions?
So certainly, I'm not aware of any existing public health orders from the Vermont Department of Health or others that have issued that kind of direction to people who were at the protests in the past week. Okay.
Oh, sorry, were you still speaking?
No, I think that's all I have to say.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Aaron. Olivia, are there any other questions?
There are. The next question is from Aiden Quigley at VT Digger. And Aiden, you should be able to enable your microphone.
Hi. So I see an update on the use of force lawsuits on tonight's City Council agenda. Do you have any update that you can share today on those?
The council, that's on the agenda because the council had requested an update from the attorneys. I don't think basically all three of those lawsuits are ongoing, and there aren't really any significant milestones that have to report that are new for the public. The council would like to understand the city's legal strategy, and that's why they've requested the executive session tonight.
Thanks. So on that topic, you're calling for accountability for the officers in Minneapolis. Do you think Officer Jason Bellevance's suspension of less than 3 weeks for his behavior shown on those, in that body camera footage, reflects appropriate accountability?
So Officer Bellavance was disciplined through the protocols and the procedures that we have in place for disciplining officers, which involves both work by the chief at the time to make a preliminary determination as to what he thought the right discipline would be, and then his consultation with the Citizen Police Commission. And my understanding is that the chief's discipline, which was very significant discipline. And if you compare it to, and maybe Chief Morrison would like to speak further to this, but that the discipline that was meted out there was very significant discipline relative to past incidents, and it was supported strongly. I don't remember if it was unanimous, but the commission felt that it was an appropriate step. So at this point, over 18 months, I think, since the incident took place, that is to go back and try to kind of second guess the decisions that were made at the time is not something I'm prepared to do. Chief Morrison.
Agree. No, I agree, sir. I agree. This is an incident that is well behind us. I would make the observation that the discipline handed down was unprecedented in my previous tenure here. There was generally a sort of line in the sand that any suspension beyond 2 weeks was really just punishing the family economically, that it doesn't serve any more of a, to fix the issues, that you want to correct behaviors. You don't want to punish families. But at any rate, I also, Aidan, I'm going to push back a little bit on the question, because you're trying to conflate a shove of a person who had been reported to be in a fight with the incident in Minneapolis. And they're just not the same. And I think candidly that we're not doing ourselves any favor when we keep conflating these two things. We absolutely looked at, the department did a huge investigation, including an outside investigator on that incident. And anytime there is an allegation of excessive use of force, we're going to take a very serious look at it. That incident has been dealt with. It is part of a federal lawsuit sorry, I might be getting the cases confused right now. But at any rate, the more we look backwards, the less energy we're putting into looking forwards. And I want to look forward. And that's why the recommendations of this special committee are so important. That's why continuing to have dialogue with stakeholders in the community is so important. And it's time for us to start growing from these incidents instead of turning around and looking at them every time an excessive force case somewhere else in the country comes up. That's my 2 cents.
Aidan, did you have a follow-up to that, or do you have any?
I guess, do you think the department's policies and procedures in the realm of officer discipline are sufficient at this time?
I do. I think we've demonstrated that we will take significant disciplinary action when there are violations of policy. That's a fact.
And I think, I'm not certain this is exactly what you're asking, but I mean, I think we do think there was more policy work to be done. That was the conclusion that came out of this stakeholder process, this special committee. And I certainly want to see the findings. That committee worked hard for months and came up with a number of items for follow-up. And now that the council committees are meeting again, now that the commissions are meeting again, we sort of move through that first wave of this pandemic, I think it's important that we move forward with some urgency to continue with the work that was called out in that special committee. When we called off when I called off the search for a new chief, I made it clear and that we were going to be in this extended interim period. I made it clear that calling off, that we weren't going to just be treading water for a year, that we wanted to move forward with policy work that needed to be done. And we're eager to do that. And I appreciate Chief Morrison taking the step today. I'm not waiting for that further committee work to happen to be very explicit about this duty to intervene, which had been one of the items called out by that committee.
All right, that's all I got. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Aidan. Do we have anything else, Olivia?
It looks like that's all the questions we have for today.
Okay, very good. Thank you to everyone for joining in. apologies for the shift in the briefing time to a later time. We'll be back to our normal time on Wednesday at 2 o'clock. We are planning a Wednesday and Friday briefing for further updates. People interested in following along by Zoom from the City Council meeting can see the links on board docs for the Board of Finance and City Council meetings that will be happening tonight. And we'll see everybody soon. Have a good afternoon, everyone. Take care, Chief. Thank you.